Have you ever sat quietly and wondered when everything changed between you and your children? One moment, you were their entire world. They clung to your hand, called for you in the middle of the night, leaned on you for every little thing. And now, it feels like you're an afterthought, a burden, even like your presence is no longer needed, or worse, no longer wanted. Maybe you don't say it out loud, but you feel it. The birthday that passed with no call. The family gathering you found out about only after seeing the photos online. The tone in their voice when they say, "I'm busy, Mom," or "Not now, Dad," as if your needs come second, or third, or nowhere at all. It's a hollow kind of ache, a mixture of hurt, confusion, and a quiet question that creeps into your chest. Did I do too much or not enough? You start to wonder if maybe you were too generous, too available, too forgiving. Maybe all the sacrifices, the ones you made with love, no question, were never truly seen. Maybe they were expected, taken for granted, forgotten. And now here you are, 60, 70, 80, carrying decades of love on your back, and still wondering if it was enough to earn their respect, their time, their appreciation. But let me say something that might feel bold, even uncomfortable. You don't have to keep sacrificing your happiness for children who have forgotten how to say thank you. That may sound harsh, but it isn't cruelty. It's clarity. Because there comes a time when continuing to pour from an empty cup doesn't make you more loving. It just makes you more tired. Madeline, 74, knows this too well. For years, she put her children first in everything. She helped pay their bills when they fell behind, babysat at a moment's notice, and always picked up the phone, even in the middle of the night. But slowly, she began to realize something painful. They only called when they needed something, never just to talk, never to ask how she was. She tried to brush it off. They're busy, she told herself. They've got lives, kids, work. But each time they forgot to check in, each time they responded to her kindness with silence or entitlement, something in her dimmed. She started to feel invisible in her own family. And yet, she kept giving because that's what love does, right? But love without boundaries becomes something else. It becomes martyrdom. And no parent, no matter how devoted, is meant to live their final chapters that way. There's a quiet truth many seniors are afraid to say out loud. Sometimes, the very children you raised with your whole heart grow up into people who don't see your humanity anymore. Not because you failed them, but because they were never taught how to honor what they've been given. You taught them to say please and thank you when they were 5. But somewhere along the line, life happened, and now they've forgotten to say it to you. Lucas, 69, spent years putting his children's needs before his own. When his wife passed, he moved closer to be near them, hoping to stay connected. He sold the house he loved, left his garden, gave up the rhythms of his old life. But what he got in return was distance. Not physical, but emotional. They were busy, distracted, sometimes even irritated by his presence. He found himself walking on eggshells, always worried about being too much. One day, sitting alone on a park bench, watching other families laugh and share ice cream in the sun, it hit him. I gave up my joy, hoping it would earn me closeness, but all it earned me was loneliness. That was the day Lucas decided something needed to change, not them, him. And that's what this conversation is about. You can't make your children more grateful. You can't force them to appreciate what you've done or how deeply you've loved them. But you can choose how you spend your time, your energy, your remaining years. You can decide today that you will no longer trade your peace for proximity, that you will no longer overextend yourself just to keep a seat at a table where you're no longer fed emotionally. Claire, 72, used to cook a full Sunday dinner every week, even when her knees ached, even when no one stayed to help clean up, even when her son came late and left early. She told herself it was worth it for the tradition, for the connection. But after a while, the tradition became resentment, and the connection, it wasn't real anymore. So she stopped. She took a weekend to herself, went to a little town she'd always wanted to visit, sat by the sea, and let herself breathe without expectation. No one noticed she was gone at first, and that hurt. But over time, they did notice. They began to ask, to wonder, to call. Because sometimes, it's only when we remove ourselves from the role we've been playing that others realize how much they've relied on us without truly valuing us. You don't need to be cruel to make space for your happiness. You don't need to disown your children to reclaim your joy. But you do need to stop believing that your suffering is a measure of your love. It's not. Real love does not require you to disappear. So let's start small. Maybe that means saying no, gently but firmly, to a request that drains you. Maybe it means planning something for yourself, just yourself, without waiting to see if your children are available. Maybe it means allowing yourself to feel angry or hurt without immediately brushing it away. Not to become bitter, but to become honest. You don't owe anyone your silence, your time, or your constant availability. Not even your adult children. What you owe is this: to live the rest of your life as fully and peacefully as you can. And maybe, just maybe, when you begin to do that, they'll begin to see you not just as the person who always says yes, but as someone whose presence is a gift, not a given. Sometimes, the most powerful change begins not with a confrontation, but with a question we quietly ask ourselves. What would my life look like if I stopped trying to please people who only notice me when they need something? It's a difficult question, because for many of us, especially parents, we've built our entire lives around being needed. It gave us purpose. It made us feel important. And it's not wrong to want to be useful, to want to be involved. But when usefulness becomes the only reason people keep you in their lives, it stops being love. It becomes a transaction, and you are not a transaction. You are a human being with a heart that still feels, a mind that still dreams, a soul that still longs for connection, real connection, not convenience. Lily, 66, spent years organizing her life around her daughter's schedule, canceled her own appointments to babysit, delayed her long overdue vacation because something came up. Over time, she began to notice something painful. She was doing all the bending. Her daughter never adjusted her own life to make space for Lily. And when Lily finally got sick, not terribly, but enough to need help for a few days, no one showed up. Not even a phone call. That was her wake-up moment. She told me later. I kept making space for people who didn't even look up to see I was fading. And that's the quiet reality for many older parents. Over-sacrificing not because they're asked to, but because they believe they have to. We grow up believing that being selfless is noble, and it is, to an extent. But if your selflessness costs you your peace, your health, your identity, it stops being noble. It starts becoming self-erasure. So let's talk about something that feels radical, but shouldn't be. Setting boundaries. Not out of anger, not to punish, but to protect what's left of your joy. Setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting people out. It simply means deciding what you will and will not accept in your life anymore. It's telling the world and your children, I love you, but I love myself too. And I'm allowed to say no. Noah, 73, learned this the hard way. His son often asked him to help with house projects, roofing, electrical, hauling lumber, all the heavy things. And for years, Noah did it. Even as his back began to ache, even after his doctor warned him, he thought, if I say no, they'll stop inviting me. They'll forget me. But one day, when he finally said, I can't do this anymore, something surprising happened. His son, at first frustrated, eventually respected the boundary. And then, instead of asking Noah to do the labor, he began to simply invite him to sit, to talk, to be part of things in a new way. Boundaries don't always push people away. Sometimes, they teach people how to love you better. But it starts with you. With that inner voice that says, this doesn't feel good anymore. That moment when you realize you've been clenching your teeth through visits, swallowing your disappointment, pretending to be okay with being taken for granted. You don't need to keep doing that. And yes, I know it's hard, especially if conflict makes your heart race, especially if you've spent a lifetime avoiding tension for the sake of family harmony. But let me offer this. Peace that comes at the cost of your truth isn't peace at all. It's just silence. Henry, 70, had always been the easy one in the family. The one who never complained. The one who paid for the family trips, even when no one offered to split the bill. He thought that staying quiet was the glue that held everyone together. But inside, He was exhausted one day. After a particularly thoughtless holiday gathering where no one thanked him, he did something new. He spoke up, kindly, but clearly. "I don't feel appreciated," he said, "and I can't keep pretending it doesn't matter to me." It shocked them, but it also opened a door. Conversations followed. Apologies, changes, slow but real. You don't always get instant understanding, but you do get something else, your dignity back. And once you reclaim that, something beautiful begins to happen. You start seeing your own life not as a supporting role in your children's story, but as a story worth telling on its own. Claire, who we talked about earlier, used to structure her weeks around her son's schedule. She wouldn't plan anything until she knew what he needed. But now, she wakes up and asks herself, "What do I want today?" Sometimes it's a walk in the park. Sometimes it's coffee with a friend. Sometimes it's simply reading a good book in silence. She still loves her son, but she doesn't orbit around him anymore. And in doing that, she found something she hadn't felt in years: joy without condition. That's what this is about. Not punishing your children, not turning cold or distant, but choosing to no longer define your worth through their gratitude or lack of it. You are not here just to be needed. You are here to be loved. And when love isn't offered freely, you don't have to keep shrinking yourself just to feel safe. Start listening to your inner voice again, the one that whispers, "You matter," even if no one says it. The one that remembers who you were before the title of mom or dad took over everything. That voice is still there, and it's time to let it speak again, because you are not invisible. You are not done growing, and you are certainly not here to live the remainder of your life in quiet sacrifice. The moment you begin to reclaim your space, not loudly, not with resentment, but with quiet strength, something inside starts to settle. It doesn't mean the pain disappears, but it begins to soften. You stop trying to prove your worth to people who should already see it. You stop performing love in hopes of earning scraps of recognition. Instead, you begin to embody something different: peace. And peace is magnetic. When you stop chasing the approval of your adult children and start standing in your own light, the energy shifts. They might not say it out loud, but they feel it. Something's changed. You're no longer bracing for their approval. You're no longer tailoring every word, every plan, every moment of your life around whether they'll be pleased or bothered. You're simply living, and that, in itself, can be revolutionary. Natalie, 70, said it best. The moment I stopped trying to be the perfect mother, and I started being myself again. And I didn't realize how much I missed her, the me, before I became what everyone needed. She started going to dance classes again. Not for anyone else, just for the joy of it. She bought herself flowers. She started saying no, softly but without apology. And do you know what happened? Her daughter, the one who hadn't truly listened in years, started calling more. At first, just to check in, then to ask questions, and eventually to say thank you. Not because Natalie demanded it, but because her daughter began to see her differently. We teach people how to treat us not through lectures, but through how we treat ourselves. That's not a lesson in arrogance. It's a lesson in self-respect. And for many seniors, it's the first time in decades they've even allowed themselves to consider that their joy matters. 2. Abigail, 76, once told me something that has stayed in my heart ever since. She said, "I spent years thinking that if I just gave more, they'd love me more. But now I know real love doesn't need to be bought." It's a hard truth, but a freeing one, because once you stop negotiating your worth, you start creating your life. You begin to fill your days with things that nourish you, that delight you, that remind you of who you are and who you still get to be. For some, that's reconnecting with old passions, writing, music, gardening. For others, it's forming new connections, finding friends who truly listen, who ask about your life without expecting anything in return. For some, it's simply learning to sit with your own company without feeling like you're missing out. Owen, 68, had always been the fixer in his family. If something went wrong, a car broke down, a fridge stopped working, he was the first call. But when he needed help after a small surgery, no one showed up. Days passed in silence. That was his turning point. So he changed something simple. He stopped offering help before it was asked for. not out of spite, but to see who would show up without being prompted. And you know what? His oldest daughter noticed. "Dad, you okay?" she asked after a few weeks. "You've been quiet." He told her the truth. "I've been okay, just trying to give myself the same attention I've always given everyone else." There was silence on the other end of the phone. Then something he hadn't heard in years. "I'm sorry." That kind of shift doesn't come from guilt. It comes from clarity. Because when you no longer run to meet everyone else's needs, they are finally left to face their own patterns. And some, not all, but some will rise to meet you in your new space. But even if they don't, your life is still yours. You don't need anyone's permission to live fully. Nathan, who is 75, said something that felt like a prayer. He said, "I thought aging meant losing things, energy, connection, relevance. But what I didn't expect was this sense of coming home to myself." He had stopped waiting for his children to invite him into their world. Instead, he created his own. He joined a book club, took long walks with a neighbor who loved poetry, learned how to make sourdough bread just because it made his kitchen smell like life again. His children didn't suddenly transform, but they noticed. They saw that he was thriving, not because of them, but despite their absence. And slowly, something changed. They started showing up more, not for help, not out of obligation, but to be around someone who felt full. Because that's what self-respect does. It creates a quiet magnetism. It says, "I am no longer begging to be seen. I am seeing myself." And that, my friend, is the deepest kind of healing. It doesn't mean the scars disappear. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care differently. You love without losing yourself. You forgive without forgetting your own needs. You serve from fullness, not emptiness. That's the power of stepping into your light, not to impress, not to punish, but to finally live. You've spent so much of your life giving everything you had. And now, it's time to give something to yourself. Your presence, your joy, your permission to matter again. Because the truth is, you never stopped mattering. You just needed a little space to remember it. Thank you for staying with me through this conversation. If you've made it here, it means something in this message resonated, maybe a memory, maybe a long-held silence, maybe just a deep sigh of finally, someone understands. And I want to say, from one heart to another, I see you. I honor what you've been through. Because this isn't easy. Choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing others isn't just a decision. It's a kind of quiet rebirth. It takes courage to say, "I deserve peace." 2. It takes strength to stop waiting for love in places where it's rarely returned. If your heart has been heavy from unspoken hurt, if your kindness has been stretched so thin it started to feel like invisibility, then let this moment be your turning point. Not because everything will suddenly change overnight, but because you will. And that's what truly matters. There's something profoundly beautiful about a person who reclaims their own time, their own space, their own voice, not with bitterness, but with calm certainty. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone who didn't notice your sacrifices. You don't need to justify why you're no longer always available, always agreeable, always pouring from an empty cup. You've already given enough. You've already proved your love. Now, it's time to live your own love story. One where you are not the afterthought, but the author. So if this message has stirred something in you, a quiet resolve, a long overdue release, I want to invite you to keep going, to take the next gentle step. Maybe that's setting a boundary. Maybe it's planning a solo trip. Maybe it's simply sitting in silence and letting the tears fall, because you're finally admitting to yourself that you've been tired for a very long time. You're allowed to begin again. And if you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters here. Your journey is part of a larger chorus of people rediscovering their strength in this season of life. Have your children changed toward you over time? How did you handle it? What have you learned about letting go or holding firm? Sometimes it just takes one person's truth to help someone else feel less alone. And maybe your story will be that light for someone else. And if this message made you feel seen, even just a little, I'd love for us to stay connected. This space was created for people like you, people who have spent their lives giving and are finally learning to receive, to rest, to rise. So if you'd like to walk this journey with me to keep having these honest, healing conversations, you're welcome here. Just click that subscribe button. Not because it's trendy, but because real community still matters. And this is a place for real connection. A place where your tears are not weakness, where your boundaries are not betrayal, where your joy, after so many years of putting it last, is finally allowed to come first. So from my heart to yours, thank you for showing up, not just here, but for yourself, because no matter what your children see or don't see, you see now, and that's enough to begin again. You are not too old to grow. You are not too far gone to be free. You are not unworthy because someone forgot how to say thank you. You are alive. You are sacred. And you are still allowed to choose yourself right now. Today, I hope you do.